BYU dismantles Colorado in the Alamo Bowl 36-14. We're talking about key plays, plus our final impression of the 2024 season. Did BYU meet expectations? That's all coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Hello and welcome to the Aptive podcast studio. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, alongside Tosh Mackintosh. We're here to break down the BYU Colorado Alamo Bowl, a game we thought would be a lot closer than it was, and BYU took it from start to finish and didn't let up. And I actually don't think Colorado had a shot. Granted, there were plays that Colorado looked good, and there were plays that BYU seemed to throw away early on. We can talk about those near touchdown passes in two separate possessions that really, when you look at the final score, BYU should have won by more. I don't think it was as close as the final score even indicated. But we'll talk about some key plays of that game. But just high level, box score, BYU Colorado, what stands out to you, Tosh?
Biggest thing is how we were able to run the ball, that we could run it at will. We had multiple running backs that were averaging about 5 yards plus a carry, and great push by our offensive line where we had a third string tackle in there. The running backs looked good, making the right cuts, making the right reads. That changed the game in my mind, where if you can just run at will, that team's going to have a hard time stopping you in any fashion.
And it wasn't just LJ. I think LJ is the workhorse, and I think, and we could talk about this a little bit more, but I think LJ throughout the season has looked injured, and you mentioned this before we started the show. LJ early on looked really good in the season. LJ against Colorado looked really good, and granted, Colorado doesn't have the most impressive rush defense, right? And so I think LJ was going to get some yardage out of this game. But you look at Sione Moa, that 13-yard touchdown run looked fantastic. Made one guy miss right at the line of scrimmage. Made him look silly at the line of scrimmage. And I'm going to break that play down actually in our next segment, because I think that was a huge turning point in the game. Not a turning point, but a huge key play in the game. Haunga, I think, had some pretty decent yardage.
He did.
Only 5 carries, 20 yards though. And then Jake Retzlaff, I think, picked his moments at the right time to get his yards.
Oh yeah, he ran it on some key third downs. I thought he ran the option really well too on when he pitched and things. So yeah, the big box score things to me, one is the running game. Second, and I know you tweeted about this a lot, was how incredible our defensive pressure was on Shedeur. That to me, and it did show up in the box score because we had sacks, we had hurries, we forced some errant throws. That our defense as a whole, but specifically our defensive pressure, was incredible.
And I'll give you credit, because that was your key to the game, right? Was how often BYU could pressure Shedeur. I think I said if BYU can force an interception or two, and I specifically said if they can win the turnover margin battle, which they didn't. Thank you, Gary Bohannon and Jake Retzlaff. And we can talk a little bit about kind of their play. I think it was a little bit pedestrian. I think that the run game kind of made up for their inability to throw the ball. And I will say too, Aaron Roderick called a fantastic game.
Yeah, maybe the best game of the year.
Absolutely. And I think that it really made up for, and I have to be careful with Jake, because I think Jake is a capable quarterback, and I think Jake has shown a lot of promise, Jake Retzlaff. He did not look good in this game. Besides his running ability, I think he showed that he was able to extend plays, extend drives, and we'll talk about kind of their third down efficiency in the next segment.
So what's funny, during the game, I wrote down in my notes, Jake is playing incredibly. He's making all of the right decisions. And then I had to erase it. But there was moments that was true. Like his choices of when to run or when to pass, I thought were really, really good. I felt like he wasn't forcing things. Even that first interception,
not on him.
No, the tight end had a chance. Yeah. It was kind of a fluky thing, and then, but it is going to stand out that his about to get sacked, forced into the end zone interception. It's partly what people have yelled at their TVs all year, and so it really stands out that he had another one of those.
And I'll be honest, during that play, first of all, I think they should have run the ball. I get that it was 3rd and long. I think it was 3rd and long at that time. I think Roderick should have just taken the ball out of Jake's hands, and they should have just run the ball on that play. We're talking about the interception. I think it was the first quarter, second quarter, early on in the game. BYU's up 10 or 7. They're up like maybe 2 scores, and Jake's rolling right and throws it into the end zone. He could have just tucked it and ran it again. I think that the smart play would have been to just get 3 or 4 yards and kick the field goal. And at that point, you think it's still going to be a close game, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, you're like, gosh, dang. As he's rolling, I'm thinking, do not force this into the end zone. Like, it's going to get picked off. And sure enough, it got picked off. And I think that's, if Jake is going to progress into 2025, if he is going to be, as BYU thinks he's going to be, a top 5 quarterback, he's got to learn to make smart decisions when he's rolling. When he's out of the pocket, he's got to learn to throw the ball away. He's got to learn to tuck it and run it for 3 yards instead of trying to force it for 10 yards downfield or force it into the end zone, because I think that's where he gets into the most trouble. That, and then his ability to throw off his back foot. And not necessarily even his ability to throw off. And by the way, we weren't even planning on talking about Jake Retzloff that much in this segment, and it just so happened that we're doing it. He loves himself his own back foot, to the point where their second possession, I believe. No, it was their first possession. Possession. Right after Darius Lassiter dropped the ball, he had that wheel route to, I want to say, LJ Martin, and LJ's wide open, right? If he just like steps into it and throws it to him and gets it to him in stride, LJ's got at least 30, 40 yards.
Yeah.
Depending on where the secondary is and the safeties are. But he beat his man, but Jake just kind of takes the snap. I don't know if it was a read option, but he takes the snap and just kind of like decides for no reason to throw off his back foot. And it's like, why are we doing that? Just step into it, hit him in stride. So I think those are the two places that Jake really needs to improve going into 2025. Decision making when he's rolling out, and deciding not to throw off your back foot when you don't have to.
Yeah. And I think another thing that didn't show up in the box score that should is that BYU should have scored 50 points.
Yes.
There was a touchdown, 2 drop touchdowns. One of them that Jake would have thrown that was dropped, and then the other one that was our buddy, the punt returner, that had a touchdown pass again that was dropped. So great. Again, I think
what a pass by Parker Kingston.
Yes.
In stride, like it was a dime to Tase, right? It was Tase that just dropped it. And again, one of those plays where you're like, you think about it at the time, you're like, gosh,
this could be huge.
That's going to cost us. Yeah. Like, that's such a big play, but it turned out to be fine. So where I thought BYU really stood out in the box score was their average field position. Not their average field position, but their field position throughout the whole game. BYU, I'll just go through it real quick. They started their first possession on their own 31. That was their worst field position until their first possession of the second quarter, where they started on their own 30. The rest of the game, so they started on their 31. They started on their own 48. They started on Colorado's 41, their own 46, their own 30, 24, their own 45, their own 28. And then they started their next 3 possessions in Colorado territory. And by then the game's already over. It's fourth quarter. Not to mention the punt return for a touchdown.
Yeah.
They had phenomenal field position throughout the entire game. Colorado did not start a single possession in BYU territory. started on the 24, the 25, the 30, the 29, the 20, the 17. I think that was after an interception. That was after kickoff. No, that was after interception. 37, 19, 18. They started the entire game in their own territory and fairly deep into their own territory. And I think that's huge when you look at, total yardage. I don't think BYU really stood out. Turnovers, they actually lost the turnover possession, the turnover margin battle. And so field position allowed BYU to put up as many points as they did and allowed them to keep Colorado off the board for as long as they did.
It was incredible. And I give credit to Jay Hill.
Yep.
It was the best defensive schemed game of the year and one of the best that I have ever witnessed in my lifetime.
Yes.
And
it all circles back to your prediction of getting pressure on Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah. And Jay was getting creative. You tweeted about it that he often, almost every time, was dropping linemen back and bringing other guys. He very rarely was ever rushing more than 4 guys. It was almost 3 or 4 every time.
Yeah.
But Colorado had no idea who was rushing in and who was dropping back. It was a thing of beauty, and our players played great. Tyler Batty had such an exclamation mark on his career in that game. What's funny is I already said earlier in the show that A-Rod, I think, called the best game of the year. Jay Hill, I think, coached his best game of the year.
Yeah.
And then to not leave out, it was the best special teams coaching. K-Pop, he had a punt return. He had an onside kick.
Yeah.
Like, our coaches just flat out coached Colorado.
It's hard to find a game as complete as that game was. And what a time to do it, too, when everyone's watching. And obviously the media hype surrounding Colorado was a little bit too much for BYU fans, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But this was just all facets of the game, offense, defense, special teams, the most complete game that I've seen in a long time. For sure, the most complete game that we've seen all season. And next segment, what we'll do is we'll break down some of A-Rod's best plays, specifically their third down conversions, because I think that was huge. BYU's ability to continue to move the chains. At one point, they were 6 of 9 on third down. They had 3 third down conversions in a row on the same drive.
Third and longs, too.
Yeah, not all of them were short. But I do think, though, that was part of the offense, though, was the ability to get into third and short, because I think most of their third downs were short.
Yeah.
And we'll break some of those down, as well as BYU's ability to get pressure on the quarterback, specifically the sacks. And we all talk about the interceptions. I think, by the way, that was it Tanner Wall that had that first one that was off the deflection or off the big hit?
Tanner Wall caused the big hit.
Caused the hit.
And then I think it was Collins, but somebody else had the pick.
So we'll talk about we won't talk about the interceptions, because I think those have been kind of maybe not ad nauseum, but they've been talked about a lot. Those are big plays, right? I want to talk about the sacks, and so we'll talk about that coming up as well on the Loyal Cougars podcast. This episode is brought to you by Aptive. Aptive believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptive will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptive is why. Visit GoAptive.com and give them a call. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's GoAptive.com. Mention this promotion. Get home field advantage with Aptive. All right, back to BYU Colorado. We're going to talk about some impact plays, some third down conversions, and some sacks. But let's start with kind of the elephant in the room. We touched on it briefly in the first segment, Tosh. The media bias towards Colorado. I think it's something that everyone expected to see and hear coming in. We even talked about it in our last show, right? Like, we knew the spotlight was going to be on Shedeur Sanders. We knew the spotlight was going to be on Travis Hunter and on Dion. And so I don't think it should come as a surprise that they talked about Colorado as much as they did. What I think is funny is you layer that on top of the fact that Colorado's losing by 20 plus for a majority of the game, and it almost felt forced at that point. I think if this game was close, fans wouldn't be talking as much about it, but because Colorado was getting boat raced for more than half of this game, it just felt over the top.
Well, you are somebody who's been in the media scene, so this is your alley way more than mine. But what I think happened is the producers and directors had told these guys, talk about Colorado.
Yeah.
That every story they'd been fed, every little note card they had of, hey, talk about this when you get a second, it was all Colorado based. And then it just felt so out of place when the Cougs are just crushing and they just keep talking about these silly stories or little topics about Colorado without much Cougar love.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So in my experience, and for those that don't know, I worked for KUTV for about 6 or 7 years up in Salt Lake City. And so the reality is the media talks about what the fans are talking about because that's what pays the bills. It's why LeBron James is so popular in the NBA. It's why right now it's Patrick Mahomes is so popular in the NFL. It's why Linsanity was such a thing. It's why Caitlin Clark is such a thing. People talk about, Caitlin Clark has revolutionized the WNBA because she's a great player, right? But also because she's so controversial. I don't know if maybe polarizing is a better word because it's not her fault. But fans are talking about her. And so ESPN, knowing that, they're going to talk about her. They're going to talk about LeBron James. They're going to talk about Jeremy Lin, a very mediocre player at best in the NBA. But because of Linsanity, they talked about him for a good 3 months, right? Jimmer Mania was a huge part of that. Now, granted, Jimmer was the best player in college basketball at the time. But Jimmer Mania Jimmer Fredette was getting coverage over a lot of NFL games, over a lot of NBA games, primetime games, primetime sports, Jimmer Fredette was getting coverage over. And it's because people were talking about it. Now, when you take that perspective and localize it, BYU is more often than not the beneficiary of that mindset in the media from a local level. There's a reason why BYU is covered more often, has more articles written about them, is on TV more locally. Now, granted, when I was at KUTV, I worked with Utah fans, and so we covered Utah probably more than we should have. But BYU was the cash cow, and the Jazz, right? Those are the two. Now, Utah is considered tier 1 still, but in terms of viewership and in terms of readership, if you're coming at it from a article or writing perspective, BYU is the cash cow. And so, Utah fans would complain, why aren't you covering Utah? Why aren't you covering this game or this event that happened at Utah? It's because no one reads it. No one cares. And I don't mean that as like smack talk. Like the data shows us nobody reads it. And so as much as BYU fans want to complain, and I get it, like I tweeted about it as well, as much as BYU fans want to complain about the fact that they weren't being talked about as much as they should have been during a game where they blown out Colorado, they are more often than not the beneficiary of that exact same mindset from a local level. And
it's what made this moment even more incredible is that they were talking about Colorado so much because Colorado, to your point, brings the eyeballs. I haven't seen the numbers yet on the TV ratings. Mm-hmm. It was going against the NFL, which is a little tricky, but I still am in the mindset that a lot of people watched that game.
Yeah.
It was getting talked about on social a lot, and it's because Colorado is a hype train, and we just beat ESPN's media darling, and not just beat them, but just whooped up on them. And so you should have been smiling a little bit as they're saying these other Colorado anecdotes.
Yes.
As Colorado's down 27.
Yes.
And
the thing is too, like it allowed these kind of national pundits to kind of take pot shots at like Dave Pasch and the ESPN crew, and it increased the discourse of that game from a national perspective. So yes, was it annoying? Yes. Was it over the top? Yes. Was it a little bit awkward? Yes. Was it good for BYU's brand? Absolutely. And BYU fans should be thankful for it. Annoyed, but thankful. So let's talk about plays now, because I think the game was more important than the actual commentary of the game. So the two aspects that I think BYU really stood out in this game granted, they had impact plays that kind of go away from these kind of two aspects with interceptions and with the punt return for a touchdown, because those were huge. But I think BYU's ability, and we'll start with the defense, to put pressure on Shedeur Sanders, we talked about it in the last segment, was pivotal in this game, and it really set the tone for the rest of what the defense could do. Even the touchdown pass to Travis Hunter that Shedeur threw, he's getting tackled.
Yeah.
Right? Like, BYU had pressure on them the entire game. And I want to talk about some of the specific plays, specifically the sacks that they had on Shedeur, because Jay Hill mentioned before the game that he was looking forward to the challenge of drawing up pressures for Shedeur that confused him, because he's fully aware that Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback that he's going to be scheming against all season. One of the best quarterbacks in the country, so we've heard, right? And based on the film that I saw, he's a phenomenal quarterback. I think BYU made him look silly in this game, and here's why. So first quarter, I'm just going to start with the first sack of the game. First quarter, a little over 6 minutes to go in the game, and what BYU does, and they do this throughout the game, this is a theme, they only bring 4 guys, right? They're not bringing 5 or 6. They're not loading the box. They know Colorado's going to throw the ball, which I think is to their advantage, to BYU's advantage, knowing because they're lining guys up really wide.
Yeah, no, if you're a one-dimensional offense, Jay Hill he's gonna crush you.
Yeah, and he did. He exploited it. So he ends up bringing 4 guys, but it's not 3 down linemen and a linebacker, right? It's not this pedestrian, let's just bring an extra guy blitz. He drops a defensive end. I don't remember who. Drops a defensive end into coverage. And he actually overloads Colorado's left side of their line with a corner and a linebacker. So they bring in Jacob Robinson and they bring in Harrison Taggart, and they drop a defensive lineman. So there's 2 offensive linemen, a corner and a linebacker blitzing the quarterback. And Taggart gets home. And again, this sets the tone for the game. That was on 2nd and 15. It ends up being 3rd and 25. It's a 10-yard sack, and they end up having to punt. Okay, the second sack, and this is probably the sack that people remember the most, and this was probably the most basic rush scheme. Jay Hill dials up a 3-man rush. Nothing special. He puts Glasgow as a spy in case Shedeur rolls out or whatever and gets loose, but it's just a 3-man rush, and this is the 23. This is right after Travis Hunter had that 50-something yard catch that looked like it was going to go for a touchdown, but doesn't. They're inside BYU's 10, and they drop Shedeur for 23 yards. And this is one where he's
it was awesome.
Honestly, like, if you took a normal sack, right, if he just gets hit and goes down, they're still kicking a field goal.
He had a couple chances to throw it away too. I laughed. There was a post on Cougar Board by Frankly Vulgar that said that Shedeur plays like me playing Madden. It's just like he just never gives up. Yeah. And sometimes that makes great plays, but he takes inexcusable sacks because of that too.
Absolutely. So really nothing else to talk about of that play other than they rushed 3 guys. They got to him. He didn't go down, and they didn't get a field goal out of it. I mean, that was, at that point of the game, that's a huge play. But nothing special as far as the pressure. Okay, let's go to the second quarter now. Colorado's first drive of the second quarter. It is 3rd and 7, right? So an obvious passing situation. They do the same thing. It's a 4-man rush. They drop a defensive lineman. This time they're going to bring a linebacker and a safety, right? And who gets home? Raider.
Yeah.
Right? This is the play right before the punt return for a touchdown, right? So again, you look at these plays and it's a big play, right? It's a sack. The very next play is the punt that led to a touchdown. Huge play, right? So again, Jay Hill just drawing up pressure, bringing in pressure, not just from the corner, not just from the linebackers, but now bringing in Raider Demooney, and Demooney is the one that gets home and causes the sack. It was almost a fumble, almost intentional grounding, right? They had to review it. And the very next play is a punt return for a touchdown.
I love that we had young players making big plays, such as Raider Demooney. Yeah. We had Siale Isera, a big old 4-star linebacker from Timpview that has been banged up this year, but he looks huge out there at linebacker, and he was fast enough to chase him down and get it. I love that about bowl games when you see young players saying, "Hey, the future's bright."
Yep. And that was the last sack, right? That was the 4th sack. And by the way, I think that's the most sacks BYU had all season, was 4. And Isera was the exact same situation, except for this time they're bringing 2 linebackers. So they're dropping a defensive lineman and bringing 2 linebackers. Again, just a 4-man rush, overloading. This time they overload the right side of the offensive line, and Isera is the one that gets home. So, again, just like phenomenal scheming by Jay Hill. To not only decide not to bring the house, because he could have easily done that, right? That's the easy way to get pressure on the quarterback. But Shedeur is capable, and his receivers are capable of getting loose fast enough to avoid that pressure. So he just brings 4 guys, but he does it in a way that confuses the heck out of Shedeur's offensive line. And his offensive line hasn't done him any favors all season. And so you confuse the heck out of his offensive line, and you're pressuring him all game and rattling him all game, which I think led to the interceptions, and I think led to their inability to move the chains throughout the whole game.
And that was an incredible breakdown of the defensive key plays. I think on the offense, Roderick deserves a lot of praise for 2 things, and they really go together. One is 3rd down conversions, and secondly, what goes with that is something I've heard fans for years talk about with Roderick is he doesn't throw over the middle. He doesn't throw over the middle. He doesn't throw over. We were crushing them over the middle.
Yeah.
Most of those 3rd downs where I feel like slants or deep posts, kind of crossing patterns over the middle. And another one I'll even bring up, to start the second half, you could see that Colorado made some adjustments, and it threw us off for a second when they were putting what looked to be their entire team on the defensive line. It probably wasn't 11 guys, but it was looked like at least 8. And I was telling my son, A-Rod's got to adjust to this. And then next thing you know, he crosses Parker Kingston right behind that massive rush.
Yep.
Tosses it to Parker. Parker's way too shifty and fast, so he makes a big play. And then you saw Colorado then had to adjust, and all of a sudden they couldn't bring the house anymore.
Yeah.
Because credit to Jake, credit to A-Rod, they had figured out, at least in this game, how to make people pay over the middle.
And it's funny because they then had to key in a little bit on Parker. And so later in the game, they put Parker in motion. And who follows him? Travis Hunter. So Travis Hunter follows him into motion. This is on 3rd and 3, right? This is Sione Moa's touchdown, 3rd and 3. And what happened was, I love this because Sione gets the handoff. Parker's in motion. Travis is following him. Sione gets the handoff. He's already into the secondary before Travis Hunter can even turn around. His back is literally to Sione Moa as Moa's running into the end zone. So they take Hunter completely out of the game because of their ability to involve everyone, including Parker Kingston.
Yeah.
The last play I want to talk about on offense, because I think their ability to convert on 3rd down, and I said this in the first segment, was pivotal in this game. As pedestrian as the offense was throughout most of this game, their ability to convert on 3rd down was huge, not only in keeping drives alive, because they didn't score on every single drive, but the ability to keep the drive alive, keep their defense off the field, but also their ability to flip the field in terms of field position was big. The other 3rd down conversion I loved was they threw across the middle to their tight end. I don't remember which one, but what they did was the offensive line went at the legs of Colorado's defensive line and just flattened them. So it was obviously designed to be a quick slant, but they took Jake's weakness, or one of Jake's weaknesses, which is he tends to throw into the defensive line, and it gets batted down or it gets tipped and intercepted, right? We've seen that so often this season. They just said, we're just going to take the defensive line completely out and level them and get a first down across the middle to our tight end. And again, it just shows that A-Rod's ability to adjust and to put his players in a position to make plays. Do they always make the plays? No. Is that on A-Rod? Not always. Sometimes he may put his players in a position where they don't make a play. I actually think the Hinckley Rapati against I think it was against Kansas, where he threw an interception in the red zone. That play call might be the worst play call that I've seen all season, and we can go back and watch the film. So is he perfect? No. I think he called a near perfect game against Colorado.
Yeah, it was the thing of beauty.
Okay, that's our play breakdown. We're going to talk in our next segment about just kind of our overall impressions on the season as we kind of try and put a bow on it. We'll have all off season to kind of reflect on last season and look forward to next season, but just kind of our early impressions of the end of the season. That's coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. All right, welcome back to the Loyal Cougars podcast. A little bit of news before we talk about kind of our first impressions or our final impressions of the of this past season. Tosh, take it away.
Yeah, so I just got posted on Alamo Bowl's website is that 6.9 million people watched the BYU versus Colorado game. To put that in perspective, that is more than is being reported for the Penn State versus SMU college football game.
Wow.
So there was eyeballs, and I love that. Colorado deserves a lot of credit, but BYU is becoming a national brand. It was an ABC game in prime time, which is the good part, but it was also against NFL games were going on at the time. You do not want to fight the NFL. Mm-hmm. We did, and we got 7 million people to watch us crush a very hyped Colorado team. It really makes me smile, and that pays dividends.
And that kind of fits perfectly into kind of this next segment, which is expectations versus final outcome. I think if you would have told me that BYU would be playing Colorado in front of 6.9 million viewers in the Alamo Bowl at the end of the 2024 season, if you would have told me that back in August, I would have said, you're nuts, right? Like, there's absolutely no way. First of all, I would have said, you're crazy. Second, I would have said, I'll take it. 100%, I'll take it. And I get that expectations change throughout the season. You know, when BYU's 9-0, you're thinking, and in fact, and I mentioned this in the last show, when BYU was 6-0, I interviewed some of the players and I said, what does it feel like to be bowl eligible? Because at early in before the season started, 4.5 was Vegas's odds for wins on the season. So a bowl game was kind of like barely attainable goal. It felt like at the time. So I said, I asked them, how does it feel to be bowl eligible, knowing your expectations early in the season or before the season? And they all said, look, it's great. We think we can do so much more. And so expectations change, right? That said, I think even then, granted, the Kansas game and the ASU game leave a sour taste in BYU fans' mouths. Specifically the Kansas game. I think the ASU game is acceptable. And the fact that this kind of weird tie-break scenario happened the way it did, that hurts, right? It stings. But I think you can look back on this season and think, man, this team was expected to win at most 5 or 6 games. Yeah. They won 11. They beat Colorado in front of 6.9 million viewers, with the Heisman winner and a top 2 quarterback in the NFL draft. Like, yes, there's a sting. Yes, they should be playing in the college football playoff, but this was a great outcome. This was a great season, I think.
I fully agree. I think the majority of BYU fans fall into one of 2 camps. On the one side, they are incredibly overjoyed because our expectations sucked going into the season.
Yep.
Whether that was from Vegas, whether that was from the coaches of the Big 12 picking us to finish 13th, whether that was realizing we're running out a starting quarterback that was 0-4 last year. Like, those were our expectations, and then we blew those out of the water. And we beat Utah, where they haven't beat us forever. You know, we went 11-2, which is incredible. But then the other camp is realizing what could have been.
Yeah.
And how close we were. And in those 2 losses, because it was we one play in either of those games and we win the game. And so then that puts a huge microscope on every mistake that the coaches made, every mistake that a player made. And so it gets some people are like really angry at certain people because of what could have been. And what I would tell people, and I think you just threaded this needle perfectly, you can be both.
Yeah.
And that's where I stand, is that I love how we crushed our expectations. That doesn't mean that I'm oblivious to what could have been. We should have been in a playoff game. And after watching that Colorado game, I think when this team's healthy and this break got us healthy, we could have won a game in a playoff game.
Yeah.
And that does sting. Overall, though, I will look back on this year and smile about the memories that it gave me and that it gave my son. This year made my son a casual BYU fan to like he's obsessed.
Yeah.
And now he knows everything about him. And to me, that was the 1996 year where I watched every single game for the first time in my life and I read about it. That was this year transformed my son, and I know a lot of BYU fans. And so I think this can be and should be a huge step in BYU's return to dominance.
To me, that was the 2001 season. Again, another season where it came down to one game, right? But again, like, this is big for the future of BYU football. I don't think fans realize, like, a season like this can really turn around a program, especially when you have an in-state rival that's meddling right now. And granted, it's interesting because BYU was the beneficiary of a healthy season for the first time in a long time. I think, well, maybe not that long. The Zach Wilson COVID year, I think they had some health benefits, and it's probably because they didn't really play against anybody. But it doesn't happen often, right? BYU's really their biggest injuries were like Connor Pay, maybe. I can't think of a bigger injury this season. I'm sure I'm missing somebody. But
I think he's the biggest, and then Keim is probably second. But
yeah, so offensive line, right? Offensive line was probably the biggest, hit the biggest with the injury bug, and they overcame it. And so I think BYU fans should be grateful for that. I also think, and we should probably address this, I think, and we've talked about Jake Retzlaff a little bit, I think Jake improved over last year. And I think that's mostly what you can ask for in your quarterback. Do I think he needs to improve next year for BYU to take the next step? Absolutely. And I addressed that in the first or second segment. He's got to clean it up. I think A-Rod is... maybe this is naive of me to say. I think A-Rod is the guy for the job, at least for the near future. I think he's creative in his play calls. Is he maybe too creative sometimes? Sure. I think he needs to improve in the red zone with his calls in the red zone. But I think he's phenomenal with assessing talent, especially at the quarterback level. Like, he knows who he has, and he knows how to exploit the strengths, not exploit the strengths, but utilize the strengths of his players. And I think the criticism that he gets is mostly unfair. And so, like, do I think BYU needs to make these massive changes in the offseason? Do they need to get rid of A-Rod? Do they need to promote Jay Hill to assistant head coach? That actually might be a maybe. Do they need to find a miraculous portal quarterback? Transfer portal quarterback? No, I don't think so. I think they need to get depth at the quarterback level. I think they need to replace a guy like Gary Bohannon, and I think they need to get depth at defensive line. And if they can do that, if Jake can improve and clean up some mistakes, I think they're in great shape next year.
No, you hit what I would hit, is that I hope this year springboards us into recruiting. And I love that in the last 2 weeks, Jay Hill has been able to get multiple former 4-star guys out of high school to flip to BYU through the portal. Now I want to see that. That's my criticism I have of A-Rod, is that he has, I'll give him some credit first, he's been great at developing guys and finding diamonds in the rough in the portal. But now we're at a place as a program, and if we want to dominate a Power 4 conference, we also have to be able to get some 4-star guys out of high school or through the portal, and I want to see A-Rod to start to get those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the next step, I think, for BYU football. This was a big stepping stone. I think this season was a success. Do I think that BYU will have the same opportunity to make a Big 12 championship next year? It's going to be tough, right? I don't think Utah's going to be as down as long as they are. I don't think Oklahoma State's going to be down as long as they are. I think a team like Kansas will probably get better. I think BYU benefited from kind of these. Arizona State was the best team in the conference, right? That's not going to happen every year. You're going to have better teams. So it's going to be a tougher road for BYU, but I think this is the perfect step in the right direction to establishing that culture that they've longed for, that they've seen Utah have for over a decade. This needed to happen.
Here's what gives me some hope and why I think that we can be great and beat anybody we play again next year is, to me, great football is defense and offensive line. And as long as Jay Hill's here, I smile at what our defense can do.
Yeah.
And what we have not given enough credit as BYU fan base is to TJ freaking Woods.
Yeah.
Our O-line sucked last year. ETN looked like he couldn't play football at this level. Now he's dominating people. The whole line, we had injuries on the line, and they looked great. TJ Woods, we got to pay that guy when he needs to stay here for a while, because if our O-line, and we're bringing a lot of guys back, and yeah, we're losing pay, but when he was hurt, we didn't miss a beat. You know, that guy from I believe it was North San Pete, Camus, he crushed it. So no, I think it's South Summit, actually, one of those letters. But
one of those smaller schools.
Exactly. That being said, our O-line and our defense are good. I think that gives me the most hope until we can really make some noise again next year.
Okay. I'm excited. It sounds like you're excited for next year. And we'll be talking about it a lot this offseason. That's going to do it for us for this show. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please, please, please go and subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're on pretty much every social media channel. Go give us a follow. Give us a like. Hit the bell on YouTube. And you'll get notified every time we upload an episode. For now, that'll do it for us. Thank you so much for listening to the Loyal Cougars podcast. See you next week.